welcome to our deep dive,
hmm
into this topic that's, well, it's both ancient and surprisingly relevant to our modern lives.
hmm
We're going to be exploring the Tibetan Buddhist perspective on life, death,
Yeah.
and the nature of mind.
Right.
We're going to be exploring excerpts from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which is kind of like a travel guide, but for the ultimate journey.
I love that. A
Right.
travel guide for death.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how this book doesn't shy away from death at all.
Right.
In fact, it really encourages us to contemplate it,
Mm-hmm.
not in like a morbid way,
Right.
but as a way to understand life more deeply.
Yeah, like by understanding the end, we might figure out how to live better right now.
Exactly.
But the book starts with why we're so afraid of dying,
Mm-hmm.
which I get it's a pretty universal fear.
Yeah, and the book uses this really brilliant analogy,
Okay.
comparing our fear to children playing hide and seek.
Okay.
You know how they cover their eyes and think they're invisible? We kind of try to do the same thing with death, but it just makes the fear bigger.
So we need to stop hiding.
Yeah.
But the book also tells this story about Dudjom Rinpoche,
Mm-hmm.
a Tibetan Buddhist master
Right.
driving through France with his wife, and they come across this immaculate Western cemetery.
Yeah, his wife even commented on how even the places where they keep corpses are so clean
Wow.
compared to the East, where sometimes even houses aren't that clean.
That's a pretty striking difference in how cultures view death, right?
Yeah.
Like we kind of try to sanitize and separate ourselves from it in the West.
Exactly. And this ties into what the book calls active laziness.
Active laziness.
Yeah, we fill our lives with so much busyness, but it's often a way to avoid thinking about the deeper stuff,
Right.
including our own mortality.
Whoa, so all that rushing around could actually be a form of procrastination?
Yeah.
Like we're so busy doing life, we forget to actually live it.
That's a great way to put it. And the book suggests that by confronting the reality of death, we can start to live more authentically and appreciate the preciousness of each moment.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
How do we go from fearing death to embracing life?
Well, the book introduces this core Buddhist concept of impermanence.
Okay.
The idea that everything is constantly changing, nothing stays the same.
I've heard of that, but it's always seemed kind of abstract.
Right.
Does the book give any examples that make it easier to grasp?
Absolutely. It tells this beautiful story about a woman named Krisha Gautami
Okay.
who lost her child and was overcome with grief.
Mm-hmm.
She goes to the Buddha for help, and he gives her this task that find a mustard seed from a house that has never known death.
Okay, that sounds like a pretty impossible task.
Exactly. As Krisha Gautami goes from house to house, she realizes that death is universal.
Right.
Every family everywhere has experienced loss.
Mm-hmm.
This realization, though painful, allows her to accept the impermanence of life, including her own grief.
So in a way, accepting that everything changes, even the bad stuff, can actually be healing.
That's a key insight. It doesn't mean we don't feel sadness or grief,
Right.
but by recognizing their impermanence, we don't get stuck there.
That's interesting, and it kind of reminds me of research on near-death experiences.
Mhm.
People who have had these experiences often describe a life review
Mm.
where they see their whole lives,
Right.
the good and the bad in a flash.
Yeah, and many come back from these experiences with a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
They realize that love, kindness, and how we treat others are what truly matters.
Wow. It's like facing death, even just getting close to it, can help us reevaluate what's important.
This ties back to the Buddhist concept of renunciation,
Oh, yeah.
which isn't about giving up all your possessions.
Right.
It's more about letting go of the things that hold us back,
Mm.
the attachments that cause us suffering.
So it's not about deprivation, it's about freedom.
Exactly.
Freedom from being controlled by our stuff or our fears.
Exactly. And that freedom allows us to be more present.
More open to the beauty and wonder of life,
Right.
even in the face of its challenges.
Okay, I'm starting to get this. So we face death, we realize everything changes, and that helps us let go. But where does the nature of mind part come in?
Well, the book then transitions to this really intriguing idea that our true nature,
Okay.
our essence,
Yeah.
is not our thoughts or emotions, but something much deeper.
And how does the book explain this?
It shares a personal story from Sogyal Rinpoche, the author.
Mhm.
He describes this moment where he suddenly realized that the mind itself is an illusion.
Whoa, that sounds like a total mind bender. How did he even get to that realization?
He doesn't go into a lot of detail about how it happened, but he describes it as this feeling that everyone else knew this secret about the mind.
Yeah.
And he was the last one to figure it out.
Okay, so if the mind is an illusion, then what is real?
The book introduces this Tibetan term, rigpa,
Rigpa.
which is often translated as pure awareness or primordial awareness.
It's like the unchanging background behind all of our thoughts and feelings.
So it's like the sky and our thoughts are like clouds passing through.
That's a great analogy. The clouds come and go, but the sky is always there.
Yeah.
In the same way, our thoughts and emotions are constantly changing, but Rigpa, this pure awareness, is always present.
But if it's always there, why don't we experience it all the time?
The book talks about 4 faults that prevent us from recognizing Rigpa.
4 faults.
Yeah. The first is that we're conditioned to believe that only what we perceive with our senses is real.
Mm-hmm.
So we miss the subtle reality of Rigpa.
So we're basically stuck in the material world and can't see beyond it.
Right. And the second fault is that we're so distracted by our thoughts
Yeah.
that we don't notice the stillness of Rigpa.
Okay.
Our minds are like a noisy room, constantly chattering, making it hard to hear that quiet wisdom within.
So how do we quiet the mental chatter?
That's where meditation comes in.
Oh.
The book presents 3 techniques: focusing on an object, using a mantra, and watching your breath.
Okay, so these techniques are like tools to help us tune into that deeper awareness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not about emptying your mind completely.
Right.
It's about learning to observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment,
Yeah.
creating space for that pure awareness to shine through.
I've tried meditation before, and it always felt like a struggle to make my mind go blank. But you're saying it's more about observing than controlling.
Yes, it's like becoming a scientist of your own mind.
Okay.
You're not trying to stop thoughts. You're simply noticing them as they arise and pass away.
Mm.
And in that noticing, you start to see that you are not your thoughts.
Wow, that's a really different way to think about it. So by understanding how our minds work,
Yeah,
we can start to free ourselves from the limitations of our thoughts and emotions.
exactly. And that freedom can lead to greater peace, happiness, and clarity in our lives.
This is all incredibly fascinating. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of a vast and profound body of knowledge. But we're out of time for this part of the dive. What can we look forward to exploring next?
Next, we'll dive into the concepts of karma and rebirth, exploring how our actions shape our experiences, not just in this life, but potentially in future lives as well.
Ooh, that's definitely a topic I'm curious to learn more about. We'll be back soon with more from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. We just explored the idea of impermanence
Right.
and this concept of Rigpa,
Yeah.
that pure awareness beyond our thoughts.
Mm.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is, but the book doesn't just lay out these big abstract ideas.
Right.
It also connects them to things like our everyday actions,
Yeah.
which is where karma comes in.
Right, karma. It's
Yeah.
one of those words that gets thrown around a lot,
Mhm.
but I'm not sure everyone understands what it really means in Buddhism.
It's definitely not about fate or punishment like some people think.
Right.
Karma in the Buddhist sense is more about cause and effect.
It's saying that our actions, both mental and physical, create ripples that shape our experiences.
So it's like every choice we make sets something in motion, and those actions have consequences.
Exactly. And it's not just about actions in this life.
Right.
Tibetan Buddhism also talks about rebirth.
Yep.
The idea that our consciousness continues after death and takes on a new form based on our karma.
That's where it gets really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Does the book talk about what it's like to be reborn?
It does.
Do we remember our past lives?
The book actually shares some pretty compelling stories about people who seem to have memories of past lives.
Okay.
There's one about Alter Flowerdew, who claimed to have vivid memories of living in the ancient city of Petra.
Wait, like the lost city in Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
the one carved into those cliffs.
That's the one. And what's fascinating is that he had detailed knowledge about Petra that even experts were baffled by.
Wow.
It was as if he had lived there himself.
That's wild. So are you saying that these stories suggest we do carry some essence of ourselves from life to life?
Well, it's certainly a possibility that the book explores.
No.
There's another story about a young girl in India named Kamaljit Kaur, who insisted she had lived a previous life as a school teacher named Rishma.
Did they ever verify her story?
Yes, she even led her family to the village where she said she had lived.
Wow.
And people there recognized her and corroborated many of her memories.
Okay, that's giving me chills.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about the mysteries of consciousness, right?
It does, and whether or not you believe in rebirth.
Right.
These stories highlight how interconnected we are.
Mm-hmm.
Our actions can have far-reaching consequences,
Yeah.
impacting not just ourselves, but also those around us.
So even if you don't remember past lives, we're still carrying that karmic baggage.
In a way, yes. And that's why the book emphasizes the importance of living ethically,
Right.
of cultivating compassion and kindness in all that we do.
So it's not just about being a good person for the sake of getting into some cosmic reward system. It's about recognizing that our actions have a ripple effect, influencing the kind of world we create for ourselves and others.
Exactly. The book tells this great story about a beggar woman named Relying on Joy.
Oh, yeah?
She had almost nothing to offer, but she used what little she had to buy some oil and light a lamp as an offering to the Buddha.
That sounds like a really pure act of devotion would happen.
Well, the book says that her simple act of generosity, driven by her faith and desire to alleviate suffering, created powerful positive karma that extended far beyond her present life.
So it's not about grand gestures or big donations.
Yeah.
It's about the intention behind our actions.
That's a key point. Even the smallest acts of kindness can have a huge impact.
This idea of making choices that create positive ripples really resonates with me.
Yeah.
But we've been talking a lot about doing things on our own. Does the book talk about finding guidance on this path?
It does. It highlights the role of the master or teacher in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition.
Like finding a mentor who can help you navigate all this?
Exactly. It even shares a story about a bandit who achieved liberation through a single teaching from a master.
Wow, one teaching. That's pretty powerful. What was it about this master that made such a difference?
The story emphasizes how a true master can see through your defenses, your conditioning, and help you recognize your true nature.
So it's about finding someone who can point you in the right direction, but ultimately the work is still up to you.
That's the idea. The book stresses that you shouldn't blindly follow anyone,
Right.
but rather seek a guide who embodies wisdom, compassion, and genuine realization.
So how do you know when you've found the right teacher?
That's a great question. The book talks about trusting your intuition
Okay.
and looking for qualities like genuine kindness, deep knowledge, and an ability to explain things clearly.
Okay, so it's kind of like finding a therapist or a coach. You need to feel a connection and trust that they have your best interests at heart.
That's a good analogy. And just as with any relationship, it's important to feel a sense of resonance and trust with your spiritual teacher.
This is all so much to process. It feels like we're just starting to get a glimpse of this vast and intricate world of Tibetan Buddhist teachings.
It really is a rich and profound tradition, but I think what we've explored so far highlights how accessible these teachings can be.
Right.
They're not just for monks or scholars. They offer practical guidance for anyone seeking greater meaning and purpose in life.
Absolutely. And I know we're going to dive even deeper in the next part, right?
Yeah.
What else can our listener look forward to?
Next time, we'll explore how these teachings can be applied to the process of dying itself.
Okay.
And what Tibetan Buddhism says about the journey after death. We'll even talk about some practices that can help us prepare for that transition.
I'm definitely intrigued. We'll be back soon to wrap up our deep dive into the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Welcome back to our deep dive into the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. We've been exploring some pretty profound stuff. Impermanence, the nature of mind, karma, rebirth. Now we're getting to what might be the most mysterious topic of all, death itself.
And the book approaches death not as an ending, but as a transition.
Okay.
Even a chance for liberation.
Right.
It emphasizes the importance of approaching it with awareness, not fear.
Right, because if we've learned anything from this book, it's that how we approach something mentally can make all the difference.
Exactly.
But it's hard not to be afraid of the unknown. What does the book say about how to actually prepare for death?
Well, it encourages us to be honest and compassionate when talking to someone who is dying.
Okay.
So often we kind of tiptoe around the topic.
Right.
But that can leave the dying person feeling isolated and alone with their fears.
So instead of trying to protect them from the hard stuff,
Yeah.
we should create a space where they can talk openly about what they're going through.
Exactly. And the book talks about creating a peaceful and supportive environment, minimizing unnecessary medical interventions,
Right.
and fostering a sense of spiritual connection.
That makes sense. It's about honoring the dying person's needs and letting them transition with dignity and grace.
Exactly.
But what about from the perspective of the person who is dying? Are there practices they can do to prepare?
The book introduces a meditation practice called Phawa, which is specifically aimed at consciously directing one's consciousness at the moment of death.
So it's like a way to navigate that transition with intention and awareness.
Exactly. And it's not just some theoretical idea. The book shares stories of accomplished Phawa practitioners
Okay.
who seem to have defied conventional understandings of death.
Give an example.
There's one about a master whose body gradually shrunk after death, leaving behind only his nails and hair.
Wow.
It sounds incredible, but these accounts suggest that it's possible to consciously influence our experience of death.
That's pretty amazing. It really speaks to the power of the mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what about for those of us who haven't mastered these advanced practices? Is there anything we can do to help our loved ones after they pass away?
Yes, there are. The book explains that the time after death is a very important transition period.
Okay.
It's called the bardo, and it's believed that what happens in the bardo can shape the person's future rebirth.
We talked about the bardos earlier, but I'm still a bit fuzzy on what they actually are. Can you remind us?
Of course, the bardos are essentially intermediate states of existence between death and rebirth.
Right.
The book describes three main ones: the bardo of dharmata,
Hmm.
which is an experience of the pure radiant nature of mind; the bardo of becoming, where the person encounters various visions and experiences shaped by their karma; and the bardo of birth, where they take on a new physical form.
And you're saying we can help influence what happens in these bardos?
Yes. Tibetan Buddhism has various practices for helping the deceased. One is to recite mantras and prayers for their benefit. Another is to perform a specific Phawa practice for the deceased.
So even though they're gone, we can still support them on their journey.
Exactly. These practices are expressions of compassion,
Yeah.
and they can also bring comfort and peace to those who are grieving.
That's really beautiful. It's like the connection doesn't end with physical death. But thinking about all this about death, the bardo's rebirth, it can feel a bit overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to connect these teachings back to our everyday lives? Make them more practical?
The book actually emphasizes that the bardos are not just something we experience after death, they're woven into the fabric of our lives.
We mean?
Well, every moment of transition, every time we fall asleep and wake up, every time we experience a strong emotion, can be seen as a mini bardo.
So it's not about waiting for some big dramatic event. It's about paying attention to the transitions that happen all the time.
Exactly. And by bringing awareness to these smaller transitions,
Yeah.
we can start to see how the teachings apply in our daily lives. We can practice letting go, cultivating compassion, and connecting with that deeper awareness that's always present.
This has been such an incredible journey. We've covered so much ground, but I feel like there's still so much to learn and explore.
Mm-hmm.
What final thought would you like to leave our listener with?
I think the most important takeaway is that these teachings are not just about death. They're about life. They're about waking up to the preciousness of each moment and living with more awareness, compassion, and joy.
That's a beautiful message. And for anyone who's feeling inspired to dive deeper into these teachings, I highly recommend checking out the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. It's a profound and accessible guide that can offer valuable insights for anyone seeking greater meaning and purpose in life.
And remember, the journey of life and death is a continuous process of learning and transformation. There's no need to have all the answers right now. Just stay open, curious, and keep exploring.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, may your journey be filled with wonder, wisdom, and the radiant light of awareness.